Thanks for the kind introduction, and I'm really, really happy to be here at Sunstone. So I just wanted to talk a bit about my church background, first of all. I'm from the Midlands. I grew up in Coventry Stake. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and I've since moved slightly further south to the Oxford area, and I'm in one of the Oxford wards now. And all this was going great until February 2020, when I started to discover some of the problems with the church. I started to discover some of the historical issues and some of the issues with the way the church leadership operates as well. So this took me really from a place of orthodoxy to heterodoxy in my religion and in my membership of the church. But in November 2020, Fair Mormon released a series of videos featuring Kwaku and Brad and Carden, and this drove me to action. The church almost needed defending from its own apologists. But the more I looked at the church media, the more I realised that a lot of church media is actually full of logical fallacies. It's full of questionable factuality. And this led me to start the YouTube channel which Julian referred to, which is Nemo the Mormon. And so Nemo is the name a lot of you will kind of know me by. But if we stop there a second and track back all the way to December 2019, we have the whistleblower report that revealed the church's Ensign Peak Fund, and that it had amassed a wealth of $100 billion. Now, I, like a lot of members, found this quite disconcerting, and it didn't really sit well with me. And I've been ruminating on it ever since. And so I kind of got on with this fact-checking in November 2020, and then I came across the videos that the church had released to discuss this amount of money that they had and to try and explain it to the members. So in conjunction with some of the journalism that had been done by the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, I decided I was going to dig deep into these videos. So the church released 3 of these videos with an opening statement, which read, "The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints uses the sacred tithes and generous donations of its members in worldwide efforts to love God and neighbour. In light of recent media stories that have misrepresented the church's approach, the church provides the following summary." And then it proceeded to show these videos. In reality, the church doesn't actually use our tithes for charitable work. That's my first point in all this. More often than not, when the church touts an act of humanitarian or charitable work, it's actually something done by a non-profit called Latter-day Saint Charities. That's a separate legal entity from the church. Its funds are separate. It's related to the church, but it makes it clear on its website. It says, "The funds used to support Latter-day Saint Charities are given online or to local ecclesiastical leaders by members and friends of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church's philanthropies department facilitates major or planned gifts. Donations of all sizes come from individuals and organizations all over the world." So the humanitarian work the church takes credit for is actually funded by individual members and their donations. Now, this is particularly poignant given the fact that some members have just been sent an email in the past couple of days trying to tout that their donations have done all this good in the world. A lot of members are going to think that's their tithing, but it isn't. It's their humanitarian aid donations, which the church isn't always using for humanitarian aid. It's sometimes just not using it at all. Here in Britain, we have the Charities Commission, which allows us to look at any organisation that's a registered charity and look at their declaration of their finances. In the past 6 years, the church has amassed $4 million in an account from our humanitarian aid donations, and it's just sat there. It's sat there during the worst crisis this country has seen in a generation. It sat there during the COVID pandemic. But anyway, back to the Ensign Peak. One of these videos defending the existence of the Ensign Peak Fund had a member of the presiding bishopric saying, "The real wealth of the church is in its members." Now, this was an attempt to give a don't look behind the curtain kind of answer, don't think about the money, think about the members, but I do agree with him. I strongly believe in and have a lot of personal experience of the goodness of the members of the church. And I think they are its strongest asset. And it is their donations and volunteer hours that comprise the good work done by Latter-day Saint Charities. It has nothing to do with the tithing funds of the church, nor the $100 billion amassed at Ensign Peak. And this is what really gets me incensed, because members who can barely feed themselves are taught by the church to pay tithing before anything else, to give 10% of their money to an organisation with a hoard of wealth totaling $100 billion, which presents itself as doing charitable work with these sacred tithes, but in fact doesn't. Now, Christopher Waddell of the presiding bishopric went on to say that the $100 billion is a rainy day fund. So let's have a couple of rainy days as examples. The 2008 financial crash and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Of 2008, they said, we don't know when the next 2008 is going to take place, said Christopher Waddell, a member of that ecclesiastical arm that oversees Ensign Peak, the presiding bishopric. Referring to the economic crash 12 years ago, he added, if something like that were to happen again, we won't have to stop missionary work. However, the journalist reported that during the last financial crisis, they didn't touch the reserves Ensign Peak had amassed, church officials said. Instead, the church cut the budget. They cite 2008 as a rainy day, but then admit they didn't use the funds in 2008, they just tightened their belt. 2019 sees a similar picture. The church announced it was going to require missionary families to pay $500 a month for missionaries instead of $400 a month. That's a 25% increase on the burden that's been put on individuals and ward mission funds. This change has gone right ahead despite a worldwide pandemic which has left many unemployed or with reduced wages. So we know how the church is going to manage to continue missionary work in event of major financial crisis, and it's to ask the members to pay more money, not to use this fund. I think overall one of the most damning statements of the whole debacle was made by the head of Ensign Peak, Roger Clark. He admitted the church doesn't need the money. He said paying tithing is more a sense of commitment than it is the church needing the money. So they never wanted to be in a position where people felt like, they shouldn't make a contribution. The Wall Street Journal added, church officials acknowledged the size of the fund is a tightly held secret, which they said was because Ensign Peak depends on donations, known as tithing, from the church's 16 million worldwide members. So the church didn't tell people because they didn't want them to stop paying tithing, even though they don't need the money. Now this looks even worse in light of the fact that Russel M. Nelson, as prophet and president of the church, had the audacity to say on his visit to the saints in Kenya, we preach tithing to the poor people of the world because the poor people of the world have had cycles of poverty, generation after generation. That same poverty continues from one generation to another until people pay their tithing. So the church doesn't need the money and yet continues to ask its poorest members to give it to them. So in light of that, I want to look at a statement that Joseph F. Smith made in 1907 at General Conference. He said, I want to say to you, we may not be able to reach it right away, but we expect to see the day when we will not have to ask you for $1 of donation for any purpose, except that which you volunteer to give of your own accord, because we will have tithes sufficient in the storehouse of the Lord to pay everything that is needful for the advancement of the kingdom of God. That is the true policy, the true purpose of the Lord in the management of his affairs in his church. I believe personally that we are seeing that day. And tithing is a biblical principle. It is something that can bring blessings to the lives of members, not because of the money they give, but because of the spirit in which they give. It says in Malachi, will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. So not wanting to rob God, but not wanting to contribute to a fund which is just growing and growing, what options do we have? After all, does it really matter whose balance sheet your offering to God appears on, so long as it's given in the spirit of sacrifice and serving others? Because as we discussed earlier, members think their tithing is going to serve others. That's why a lot of people pay their tithing. And remember, when you're in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of your God. Now, I've come up with an option, and seeing as it's very difficult these days to bend the ear of leaders of the church, I've started a petition. And the premise of the petition is very simple. If you get your numbers hat on, I'm just going to walk you through the simplicity of the maths involved. The church receives $7 billion a year in tithing. The operating budget of the church, which is made up of tithing money, is $6 billion. The extra $1 billion is put into savings. These savings have notably grown into the $100 billion sat in Ensign Peak. And that same fund grows by $7 billion a year. This means the church could replace the tithing income with the profits from Ensign Peak and continue to function exactly as it does now. The fund will still grow, they'll still save $1 billion away each year, and they'll still continue to run the church as normal. So what would we do with our tithes? We don't want to rob God. Well, we could continue to donate them, but to local and international charities instead. The church, when talking about immigration of Latter-day Saints, said this: in the early days of this dispensation, church leaders counseled members to build up Zion by emigrating to a central location. Today, our leaders counsel us to build up Zion wherever we live. Why not apply this principle to tithing as well? That's $7 billion of extra charitable work that could be done each year all over the world. When you compare this to the $2.2 billion in charitable work the church has done since 1985, I hope you'll agree the church has massive potential to do good with the tithes of their members beyond that which they've actually achieved so far. Now, all these numbers are very big and very complex and very difficult to get your head around due to their size and scale. So there are two things we can do to try and combat that. First, I ask you to go to the website MormonBillions.com, which shows you a graphic representation of the size of the Ensign Peak Fund. It helps you put it all into scale and context. Second, you can think about this equation. Take 1,000 people. Get every one of them to donate $1,000 every single day for the next year. You would have, at the end of the year, $365 million, which is a lot of money and sounds huge. But that is 0.52% of the $7 billion that could be done if the church allowed members to donate to charity. But what would $7 billion actually achieve in the world? It's such a big number still. What could it do? Well, there's a website called GiveWell, and it helps us understand the cost effectiveness of charitable causes. It helps you look at the cost benefit analysis, how much good is done per dollar of donation. And they've ranked some causes, and their top three causes I'll run through now, and we'll look at just how much good could be done in those causes by the use of the church's donations in this way. Number one is medicine to prevent malaria. It costs $7 to protect a child medically from malaria per treatment, and they require 4 a year. So that's $28 a year to protect a child from malaria. In 1 year, the church could protect 250 million children. Point number two is mosquito nets. It's a cheaper cause still. It costs $5. The church could provide 1,400,000,000 mosquito nets in 1 year. The third cause is vitamin A supplements for children. 1 dose costs $1. So that's 7 billion doses. Now, in all three of these examples, the church can provide far more than is actually needed. 400,000 people die, the majority of them children, from malaria each year. The church could in 1 year protect every single one of them by allowing its members to donate to these causes. 200,000 children die of vitamin A deficiency. The church could easily provide supplements to every single one of them in a year if they would just allow members to be charitable with their tithes rather than it having to go to the central funds of the church. There are countless other causes that could be helped too if you just think about it. And this is why we should petition the leaders of the church to be truly self-reliant, to be self-sufficient from their investments and their land and their for-profit ventures. They spent $1.5 billion on a mall, of which they will be seeing massive returns. They should allow us as members to do charitable work with our tithes, build Zion where we are, serve God, and save the lives of thousands of men, women, and children around the world. So there'll be a link to my petition. I really hope you'll sign it, and we'll see if the leaders of the church will allow us to do some good in the world. Thank you.